Hey guys, Corey here. Welcome to Blue Talks, and I hope you enjoy this video.
Right. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here in Oxford. I'd like to start with a short piece of music, which I'd like you to listen to very carefully. You can close your eyes if you wish. See, that's very uncomfortable because it leaves something slightly unfinished. Our brains have a fundamental need for closure. They hate sort of incompleteness and uncertainty. And they spend an awful lot of their time and their energy in trying to find closure by looking for meaning and understanding. This isn't just artistic fuzziness, or it's actually biology. We've evolved pattern-seeking and problem-solving minds that over millennia have tried to work out how to fill the gap of something that's left over. So when that last note doesn't ring true, you're left holding a question, and your brain hates that. It hates a question. Now, there is an evolutionary, biological, survival reason for this, is that if you couldn't predict, you died. So if you can imagine in the prehistoric world, say 100,000 years ago, if you couldn't detect nature, if you couldn't see what it meant, then you might end up as someone else's dinner. But if you could see what it meant, then you had the ability to make understanding and meaning, and therefore take action and survive. So we've evolved to make symbols in the dirt, to scratch stories on cave walls, in order that we can begin to communicate and to understand the story of how we're living. And this has evolved into the creation of sort of very complex systems like cities, or maybe shopping malls, or even mobile phones and computers in your hand. We didn't just evolve for survival, we also evolved for narrative. And the reason that we have narrative is so that we can communicate and understand what happens next. And that is the key question in everything, is what happens next. So I'd like you to imagine that you're in the African savannah about 100,000 years ago, and that you hear some noise in the grass and you're not sure what it is. So you ask yourself, what is it? Option A, it's just a noise and I'll ignore it and get on with what I'm doing. Option B is that it's just the wind in the grass. Option C, it might be a tiger and I have to run. Now, the people who chose option C, they survived. The people who chose options A and B, well, they're not around anymore, so they're not our ancestors. I started out as a theatre designer, trained as a theatre designer, and then gradually sort of that evolved into film design. Over the course of quite a few years, I then sort of had a chance meeting and moved into basically hotel design for an international hotel design company. And I worked with them for about 5 years, loved it, and then thought, well, I can do this all by myself, for myself. So I set up my own company, which was CLA. And I adored having my own company. I worked with designers that I loved. We won awards and we did all sorts of beautiful projects throughout the world. About 10 years ago, I took on a business partner. This was a friend of 30 years or so. Everything seemed to be fine. Then on one random Tuesday afternoon, I decided that I would just have a quick look at his computer because I happened to be there, and saw that there was a file open. When I looked at the file, there was an invoice on it, and a fairly substantial invoice for a project that I'd never even heard of. And I didn't quite understand what was happening. There's a sort of discomfort and disfit when something you see doesn't fit the story or the picture that you have in your mind. I felt the blood drain from my body. I had to sit down, my legs felt weak, and I thought, well, this doesn't quite make sense. Maybe this is something that I've done, or maybe I've misinterpreted something. It wasn't anything that I'd done, and I hadn't got it wrong. So the result of all of that, and I won't go into all the details, is that we had to close the company in 2019. Now that was okay. It was very upsetting, but it is a case that when you lose something that you consider to be your superpower, a part of your identity is also lost, and that's very difficult to deal with. By coincidence, we then moved into COVID and the pandemic, and we were all in lockdown. And I thought, what do I do with myself? So I did what was one of the only things that you can do in those sort of situations, is that we could go out alone, and I started sketching my local area. I went partly because it was a method of getting out. Drawing is something I've always loved, and I drew my local area and posted on social media. I was amazed because it just resonated with people, particularly the local area. In fact, it resonated so much that I became an accidental author, illustrator and book publisher. And now, sort of 4 books down and 5th one on the way, my life has been completely changed and transformed by this, but it's the 4th big change in my life. As I think Picasso said, never waste a good mistake. The world comes at us from birth in massive, raw, chaotic data. And that data is almost impossible to understand. That is, we don't understand it until our brains actually get involved. It's our brains that actually make the meaning in the world. So the meaning is not in the world, the meaning is in us and how we interpret it. In effect, we don't see the world as it is, but we do see it as we are. And of course, sometimes we think that we can do it much, much better. But our brains are basically what might be called glorious fabulists. They are master storytellers. They adore telling stories, making it up, even if it's not quite true. But stories are what build our communities, our homes, our lives, and our relationships. The thing that is responsible for this is this strange 3-pound jelly-like blob that we keep in a completely closed box with virtually no direct contact with the outside world. Yet from that, we become us. We somehow find our sense of self. Part of that whole learning process is understanding that we see patterns in everything. The learning process, and indeed probably the survival process, is learning how one thing relates to another, how connections are made and how correlations are made. So we see pattern in absolutely everything. Maths, if you like, is just recognizing patterns in nature and formularizing them. Music is patterns in pitch, tone, time, and decoration is often just repeated patterns, repeated in certain different ways. Basically, we're hardwired for pattern. Pattern is how we learn, it's how we understand, it's how we correlate all the information that we know in the world. But from pattern, we get story. Stories are what bind us together. Stories create our groups. They're how we communicate. They bind us into groups, be it political, philosophical, social, sports, army, whatever it may be. Patterns are what bind us together. Not only that, but stories also, of course, are the thing that changes the world. And here you have some examples from the Bible, from Copernicus, from Newton, from Darwin. These are stories, new stories when they arrived, that completely change how we see the world. Now, I'd like to explain about story. Story is basically event that we see, and then we find some sort of connection, some sort of pattern between all the events, and then we correlate all of this into a story. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning psychologist, realized or taught us that there were 2 completely separate systems of understanding, learning, and operating. System 1 is very, very fast, and it's intuitive, it's emotional. System 2 is very slow, calculating, it's logical, and it speaks much, much louder more often than System 1. The remarkable thing about all of this, and where I'm coming to, is that in order to create, in order to be creative, to design, you need to be, and are, if you are, fluent in both. Which means that basically you leap with System 1 and then you land with System 2. So that allows us to dream big and then to deliver with System 1 and System 2. What I'd quite like you to do is to imagine yourselves, your whole existence, as a sort of bubble, a soapy bubble. And within this bubble, you contain all of your thoughts, all of your thinking, all of your biases, all of your attitudes, your stereotypes, and your assumptions particularly. Now, the film, the outside film of this bubble is what Stuart Kauffman calls the adjacent possible. Innovation doesn't exist within the bubble, because that's what we know. Innovation exists when we step outside of the bubble. And that outside of the bubble is uncertain, it's risky, it's dangerous. But in order to find anything creative or innovative, we have to step outside the bubble. That involves a lot of risk. All innovation, all creativity starts with curiosity and doubt. It doesn't begin with an answer, it begins with question and doubt. Now that we've sort of leapt out of the bubble, let's return to story. All story has a very similar sort of structure. In all stories, there is a hero, and the hero, of course, has a problem or something he wishes to solve. He finds a guide who shows him a possible route of solution, and then eventually overcomes the problems and is transformed as a result. Three basic questions, three critical questions that every design, every story, every film you've ever seen has to solve in some way. First of all, what does the hero want? Who or what is standing in their way? And then, of course, what do they become if they succeed, or indeed if they fail? And all of these stories that resonate with us are all about transformation. It's a question of who we become. The big mistake that most people make is that they consider themselves the hero when being a creative. And that's completely wrong, because it's not themselves that's the hero. It is, in fact, the user, the end user. So it's not you, it's them. So we, as a designer or a creative, we are just the guide. Don Norman, who's a design psychologist, has a system of how to look at and understand design and creativity. So he approaches it from three angles. The first is visceral, which is your gut reaction, how you feel about something. The second is visceral, and that's how you actually use it, what you actually do with the thing. And the third is actually reflective or philosophical, if you like, into what that actually means to how we live. At the same time, we have to follow a triple arc, and all projects and all designs and all creative subjects follow a similar sort of pattern. We have to solve the external problem, which is who or what the thing is. We have to solve the internal problem as to what they feel or what someone is feeling when they're using it. And then we have to solve the philosophical problem of what does it actually mean, and how does it change culture, and how does it change meaning? The problem, I think, is that we're all educated out of creativity. If you ask any 5-year-olds, and these were drawings by my children when they were younger, if you ask any 5-year-old, can you draw, sing, paint, dance, imagine impossible things, inevitably they will all say, yes, no problem, they'll just get on with it. But if you ask the same children 10 years later, I would think 80 or 90% will say, well, you know, I'm just not creative. So my question is really sort of what happened? And I think what happened is that we taught them that there was just one right answer, and that they should be moving towards answers rather than inquiring and being curious. And as a result, they've lost that sense of curiosity that fostered their creativity. So we teach them what to learn, not how to learn. I don't think it's too late, though. I think that is a savable situation. We just have to change how we educate and how we can sort of reignite our creativity. Creativity doesn't start with answers, it starts with doubt, and it starts with questions. When you're in a situation, be it anything that you come across in the next few days, and you're trying to reply to someone or talk to someone, it is worth asking the question, am I asking the wrong question? That sort of discomfort, that feeling of uncomfortableness, is not something that you need to medicate away or ignore. That's actually what your brain is doing, and it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is pushing you to discomfort so that you begin to find innovation and solutions. All our interactions, everything we have every day, is based on a sort of story. We're all born creative, but somehow we all get educated out of it. And we've learned to fear failure, which I think is one of our greatest problems. Allocate 30 minutes every single day to do something with your hands, and particularly with your hands. It might be drawing, might be cooking, just pursuing an idea, writing bad poetry. It doesn't matter what it is. You do need to do something, but allocate a specific time every day. 100,000 years ago, our ancestors started looking at chaos and said, how can I make some sort of coherence out of this? And they asked themselves two big questions. What if and what next? I think we live in an age of fairly unprecedented uncertainty, with economic uncertainty, climate change. I think there are a lot of things that we probably haven't dealt with previously. Don't retreat from that uncertainty, because that's not who we are. We are a creative species. That's what has separated us from most of the other mammals in the world. We are the species that look at and listen to the unfinished symphony and want to finish off that task. Discomfort, I think, is quite normal. It's not something that you need to avoid. You need to step into that area of discomfort, embrace it, and look for the creative solutions within it. Now, the brain does this naturally, but we've taught it how not to do it. I think we need to step through the bubble into the adjacent possible and to see what we can create, because stories do change the world and they change how we look at the world. Dream big, dream more. Don't abandon your creative selves. Step through the bubble into the adjacent possible, because even when you create something small in every little way, that contributes to potentially to changing the rest of the world.